Okay. What do you think of when you hear the word learning disability? Many people tend to think of that weird kid in the corner or someone who's just dumb, when in reality, it's the opposite. I think the term disability is a harsh term because disability is something that hinders a person's way of living normally. While learning disabilities are hard to have, they do not control the way a person who has one lives. I think learning differences is a better way of saying it because all they do is make a difference in a person's life. What I'm going to talk about today is ways of teaching children with learning differences and how to help that child learn in the best way for them. So, the five original styles of learning when teachers are in college and learning to be teachers, they are taught constructivist, which is the style for students who learn in their own way how they learn best, whether they're like an auditory or a visual learner. The second is collaborative, which is group projects. Um, the third is inquiry based, where students are asking questions and making real world connections to those questions. The fourth is integrative, where students are learning things and making connections to those things that they learned. And the last is reflective, which is pretty self explanatory, but it's where students and teachers reflect on what they've taught or learned. So the three main learning differences in a classroom, many classrooms, are dyslexia, dysgraphia, and ADHD. Does someone want to try reading this? Naya?
My holiday break, it was fun. I got three video games for my Wii.
It's my holiday break was fun. I got through video games for my Wii U. This is an example of a second grader with dyslexia. So, dyslexia is a learning difference characterized by problems in expressive or receptive oral or written language. Struggles or problems can occur in reading, speaking, spelling, writing, or listening. It describes a different kind of mind. Oftentimes, kids with dyslexia are very gifted, but they just learn differently. This is oftentimes what dyslexia looks like to many people. Um, Often, children have no idea that this is how they're not supposed to read, and that they just assume that that's normal and how everybody sees it. Oftentimes, it's corrected or helped with skip reading, where children are taught to read the um, parts of the word and they're not reading the whole word, so it helps them understand the word faster and be able to read faster. The second one is dysgraphia. Dysgraphia is sorry. Dysgraphia is a neurological condition, a learning difference in which someone has difficulty in writing for their age level. This can range from issues with physical active writing to issues with just translating their thoughts into words on a piece of paper. Dysgraphia is manageable with interventions that can help you learn new writing strategies. There's actually many different places here in Greenville that help with all of these learning differences. There's one in Malden called the Pearl, which I actually went to when I was younger, and it definitely helped in all of these things. And they teach you different styles and different strategies when you're in the classroom. So this is often what dysgraphia looks like. The first one is very shortly after a dysgraphia diagnosis. They often have no concept of spacing. They use inconsistent lowercase and uppercase, and they often press too hard on with their pencil, and this causes holes in their paper when they're erasing because it looks like this, and it's very hard when a child sees this and everybody else is writing straight, and so they're all trying to erase it all the time. But because they write so hard, there oftentimes causes holes in their papers. Writing is actually painful for a child with dysgraphia um, because oftentimes they write in a weird, like, oh, they hold their pencils in a weird way. So oftentimes kids with dysgraphia have pencil grips. The second one is an example of a second grade student's best handwriting with dysgraphia. And oftentimes when they're younger, dysgraphia is helped or corrected by tracing letters and tracing words. So ADHD is the third one, and many people know about ADHD, but ADHD is hyper deficient active attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and it's a neurobehavioral disorder in childhood. ADHD refers to a family of related chronic neurobiological disorders that interfere with an individual's capacity to regulate activity and behavior and attend to tasks in developmentally appropriate ways. So, oftentimes, ADHD looks like excessive talking, fidgeting, difficulty sitting still, difficulty being quiet, difficulty engaging in leisure activities. They have difficulty resting, and they often intrude and interrupt. And a lot of kids with ADHD struggle with restlessness. This can be external or internal, and oftentimes kids with ADHD are very impatient. ADHD is not always something you can fix. None of these learning differences are, but unlike dyslexia and dysgraphia, ADHD is one that can be helped with medicine. The main issue with medicating children with ADHD is that there can be false diagnoses because children are diagnosed so young, and a lot of their symptoms and signs of ADHD are also signs of kids just being kids. So oftentimes, teachers use these strategies in their classrooms. Um, clear and clear written and verbal instructions are very good for a child with ADHD because they oftentimes, if you're just telling them, they're probably not listening to you. So if they have a written um, instruction, then they will be able to look back at that written instruction. Um, Scheduled organization check-ins are very good for a child with ADHD because oftentimes they get distracted and they can't remember what they were trying to do in the first place. Um, Giving opportunities to get up and move around and just like move their body is very good. Flexible seating, which is actually a lot of teachers here have flexible seating, and it's very helpful, especially for children with ADHD. Um, Timers are very good for children with ADHD because it keeps them on task and it gives them a time limit. Um, long term projects is very helpful, like what Mr. Satterfield did for our senior project. Um, and providing fidget toys, but teaching them how to use them properly, because a lot of people just are like, oh, fidget toys are great, but fidget toys can be very distracting, and so you have to teach a child how to use them and they're not be distracting. How many people do you think are affected by dyslexia? What about dysgraphia? Just guess. And ADHD? So actually, 10 to 20% of the U.S. population is affected by dyslexia. Out of 30 people, 1 in 6 are likely to have dysgraphia, and 6.1% of the children in the U.S. are being treated with ADHD. There's also the ages up there that oftentimes the signs for ADHD are seen between kids between 3 and 6, and oftentimes they are diagnosed around the age of 7. So why is this important to me? I'm passionate about this topic because I want to be a teacher, but I also have a few learning differences. So I understand what it's like to be in these kids' positions. I've struggled with dyslexia, ADHD, and dysgraphia throughout my life. When I was in elementary school, school in general was very hard for me. I had to go through many school tests, and that can be scary for a first grader to be put in a room and told to do the stuff that is very hard for them. Ephesians 2:10 states, "For we are God's handiwork, created in Jesus Christ to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do." I wish I knew this verse sooner in my life because when I was younger, I had a very hard time confessing that I needed help in school. And when I finally did it, it was when my grades were falling apart and everything came crashing down. I still have a hard time asking for help in school because I want to pretend like I don't struggle when I do. And because of my learning differences, I will always struggle. And finally have had to come to the terms with that. That's okay.
Yes. Yes. Y'all have any questions or comments for him?
try not to talk too much. I have a question and a comment.
Okay.
Okay, first the question. Haley, when you were doing your research about different ways to help kids with dyslexia, dysgraphia, and ADHD, if a teacher does that in their classroom, how does that affect the kids that don't have a diagnosis?
Oftentimes, oftentimes kids with learning differences are like they have IEPs or accommodations, and so a lot of times they're just like an individual thing. Like I have extra time on tests and quizzes, and so sometimes I can just go in afterwards and finish taking it, or I can send it to study hall. So a lot of times it doesn't necessarily majorly affect the other kids in a classroom because most of the time teachers just can go to that child and be like, "Hey, do you want to use your accommodation on this topic?"
I sort of have a question related to that, if you don't mind. So like, the, there's a lot that resonates here. So on that topic, in my class, any setting, I've got most that won't have the accommodation, some that will. And because y'all are older students, we've been instructed that you need to learn to advocate for yourself, to ask for help, like you said. Mm-hmm. So it's like there's a really practical element to this, that here are things that you can do to make this a little easier, or actually get the job done. But also there's a very personal aspect to it, that you kind of have to put yourself out there and say, hey, and it's not like putting yourself out there in the sense that I know the answer. It's the putting yourself out there and saying, I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe there's not really a question to that, but how significant is that difficulty of having to put yourself out there where most of your classmates are not having to ask for this one way or another, and here you are, you're knowing you got an option. You can either do well by asking for help, or not do well and stay safe and not have to ask for help. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So my mom's laughing in the back because this is something that I do. I will just not go ask, and I'll just let my grades just come crashing down. So oftentimes it is embarrassing to go ask for help, especially when you don't know the answer. So I mean, oftentimes kids will just not ask for help, and they'll just deal with it like internally and just have a hard time internally, and they just won't go to a teacher, or because of like a fear of like the teacher making fun of them or their friends making fun of them because they don't know the answer and they think they're dumb.
Yes, ma'am. No, go ahead.
As you look forward to your teaching career, based on your own experience, how might you set up your classroom and your environment in a different way for students?
I've definitely actually thought about that recently, and I definitely want to have like flexible seating and like obviously like fidgets and everything like that, because that is something that helps me. But like when I'm thinking through it, it's just like I'm thinking through the things that like have helped me get through that. And I want to do elementary school. And so when I'm thinking of all the things in elementary school that helped me focus and helped me do my best, I want to implement that in my classroom.
Again, something on that note, I'm super glad that you brought up, I'm not going to make eye contact here. I'm super glad that you brought up this whole senior seminar project. It's been going on since January, right? Remember how early on we talked about how I break this thing up into bite-sized pieces where if you do it right, we can handle the big workload over the course of time? Y'all realize that's not an accident. How many of y'all remember me coming in here and talking and having somebody keep me on a timer because I wanted to quit after a certain amount of time? Y'all remember? Yeah. Remember how when y'all would interact with one another, I had a big timer up on the board. That is not an accident, because yours truly has. This has been a very important part of my story as well. So, and I gotta think, like, this goes back to the first question. I gotta think, like, how many of y'all that don't necessarily struggle with any of this stuff, but you super appreciated me breaking it down into smaller pieces, right? You super appreciated having the timer. Like, all I'm saying is, like, this is one of those things that, as someone who's going into the teaching or plans to go into the teaching field, it's like I don't know. I kind of think that everybody would benefit from at least a little bit of implementation, especially if a sizable portion of the students need it. It's one thing that for everybody to just kind of benefit from it, but especially when it makes all the difference in the world for some students, it's really significant. Yes, y'all have any other comments or questions before I open it up?
This is just deeply personal to me, so I so appreciate Haley doing this. And actually, the passage that you picked to highlight is one that I have written on the floors in my room. Oh no, I'm gonna get emotional. Because that is a foundational part of my philosophy of teaching. And then the other comment I wanted to make is um, I think that a lot of times people are so focused on themselves and how they're doing in school that maybe they're not noticing just how hard their peers are working to keep up. And that's something that I really appreciated. I feel, and I don't know, Haley, if you want to say anything or not about this, but I feel like you have to personally take ownership and really work to develop character qualities maybe earlier than some kids where school is coming easy. They might that might happen like in their first job or when they're out on their own. But I think especially for someone who is meeting challenges early in life during education, like you really have to work to build that character.
Classmates, are you? No, go.
I'm just genuinely curious. You said that like a lot of people, like especially when you're younger, there's a lot of false diagnoses. Did you ever in your research see like the what is like an appropriate time for a child to be tested with ADHD? Because I've gone to see like in kindergarten and even since then.
Yeah, there's not a set date like age that many kids, because so many kids are diagnosed around three, like their signs are seen like when they're 3 to 6, and then they're diagnosed around the age of 7. So that's very early elementary. And like when I'm thinking about it, there hasn't been a lot of research on like the false diagnosis and like when you should diagnose a child with ADHD. But my opinion is like later in elementary school, when they're starting to get out of that like younger child, like that can't sit still and that interrupts and like all those things that an ADHD child like does. They're starting to get out of that as they're getting older into like third, fourth, and fifth grade. And so honestly, I think that would be a more an ideal time to diagnose a child with ADHD.
And on top of that, like um, the other dyslexias and dysgraphias and stuff like that, it's interesting that a lot of times that stuff doesn't come about because schoolwork just doesn't look like that for them, right? And depending on how each of those things manifest themselves, it's gonna, it may be something that you don't tell until fourth, fifth grade, when they're having to read massive bodies of text at the same time. Um, yeah, so there's it's one of those things that I think and on this note becomes one of those things that teachers become really really important on being able to spot those things. Not necessarily the teachers are responsible for the diagnosis, but teachers are the ones that are putting things in front of them
Mm-hmm.
where these types of things are going to show, putting themselves in those situations. So that's why you hear so much about teachers being so involved in not just, I mean, that, you talked a little bit about like medication and all that kind of stuff. The teachers are heavily involved because they're the ones that see them in action,
Mm-hmm.
and see them in comparison to their peers. That's another big indicator as well. Classmates, y'all got anything else?
You could say maybe in elementary school, middle school, high school. What are some things that some teachers have done to help you? Like some good examples, maybe from a couple teachers that you would like to
Well, Miss Waring's one of those people, and sorry, I'm getting emotional. So in 6th grade, when I had Miss Waring, she would let me sit I would sit basically in like, it was basically like a cabinet, but it was like a desk cabinet kind of thing, and I would literally sit there and block myself off with like the test dividers, and I would just sit there and put headphones in and do my homework. Um, and she would let me do that. Like she had people like sitting underneath her desk. Like she would literally let us just sit wherever made us feel comfortable, and then just if that let us do our work and that helped us, and she wouldn't like move us, and she would just let us sit there. I've had teachers when I was in first grade is when I was diagnosed with a lot of the learning differences, and so my teachers would give me extra time. I went to the Pearl, and that was very helpful. Um, and they taught me basically all the stuff for dysgraphia. They helped with that, and they helped me basically be able to write, which I still struggle writing sometimes. And if like you guys see me writing, I turn my paper so I don't write slanted. But like just all the like different strategies that the pro taught me, I still use every day.
And by the way, again, like kind of projecting this out onto those of you that maybe haven't struggled with these kinds of things. This is the academic way of life. Like I guarantee you, every single one of y'all that are about to go to college, you're going to need a pocket full of strategies that help you do well in school. If you don't already have them, like some of y'all know, like what your best best surroundings are to actually get work done. Whether that's like caving yourself in and blocking everything else out, yeah, like just and feel free to be as weird as you want with that kind of stuff. Like, I got sorry, this I've got scents, I've got candles and whatnot in my office. I know there's stuff where I just getting a whiff of it, and that sounds like I'm a druggie. It's not that. But honestly, like truly, like learning those types of techniques are one of those things that all of you are going to need. You're going to need to learn, like when it's time to get locked in and get work done. There's a best way of doing that. So, yeah. Anything else? Great job.